Anytime.
We're delighted to have with us today is a very special guest, Dr. Billy Graham. I personally appreciate him deeply and very much because he is doing today the same thing he did when he started out, preaching the gospel of Christ with such sincerity and such force until he causes many people to find the Lord Jesus Christ. And we admire that so very deeply, and it's a joy to have him with us today. Billy, it's so good to see you.
Thank you, Leston. It's a great privilege to be with you, and I have, of course, been watching you on television since I've been in town, and deeply appreciate the ministry God has given you, and thank God for you, and deeply appreciate your encouragement and support in this crusade and the work that we have done.
Well, we have followed your ministry from the beginning, and we've always been excited about it. I'll give you a little funny joke. I was coming out of Taiwan recently, and I had my test on my hand as I was going through the immigration. I saw a young man there, and he hesitated for a moment, and I looked up and I said, "Sir, are you a Christian?" He looked back at me and said, yeah, Billy Graham Christian. Oh, I said, "What kind?" He says, "I'm Billy Graham Christian." And I said, "Can you prove it?" And he opened his little desk and pulled out a little book that you'd written, and given to them. And I said, "Well, how did you become a Billy Graham Christian?" Oh, he said, "Big meeting in town here," and I went and became one. And there he was reading and loving the Lord.
I'm very thankful. You know, when we were in Taiwan for the crusade, it poured rain every night, but the stadium was filled every night. And people would come forward in that rain, and it's wonderful to see what God is doing in the Far East right now. In fact, I'll be holding 5 crusades this year in Japan.
My goodness.
And I think in the Far East, God is at work in a very unusual way. I'm sure you sensed that and felt it when you were there.
Yes, that's beautiful. Ability, there's so many people talking depressive today, and with a lot of sadness in the world. Do you think it's really just exciting to be alive today?
Very much so if you're a Christian. If I weren't a Christian, I'd be very pessimistic. But I feel that what we're seeing happening in the world is what our Lord predicted. I mean, you can take Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and Mark 13 and just read almost what is happening in the world today. And if you compare it with Daniel and Ezekiel and the other prophecies of the Scriptures, it seems that we're heading toward that climactic moment that our Lord predicted. And of course, there are differences in eschatological views that people may have, but there's one thing we agree on, and that is the Lord Jesus Christ is coming back, and He is the only hope. And of course, I live every day expecting, that may be the day. And I think if we live with that expectation, it purifies our hearts, as the Scripture tells us it does.
That's beautiful. You're carrying the same type of crusade today that you did 20 years ago.
Yes.
Do you see a difference in the people of America in these 20 years'
Yes.
time?
I think that the people that are coming today to our crusades are young people by and large. The average attendance in the average crusade, I don't know how it'll be in Indianapolis, but in the average city is, that come forward, let's say, that's how we can tell the people that come forward to receive Christ, is between 18 and 22. That's sort of the university age. It's the age of commitment. And we don't see very many people over 50 coming forward to receive Christ. And that's true, I suppose, throughout the history.
And that's a pity.
It's a pity.
There are millions of them that are over 50 that need Christ.
Yes. And their hearts have become hardened maybe through the years, through sin or through rejection of Christ or so forth. But I'm encouraged by the polls that have been taken by people like Gallup and others at the fact that more and more people are accepting the fact of a personal God, of a personal devil, a belief in the Bible as the Word of God than, let's say, a generation ago. When we were here 21 years ago, there wasn't that kind of feeling in the country. When I go to universities now and give talks, I never get questions on science and the Bible anymore. That seems to be something in the past. What I'm getting now are heart questions. We want to know, is there an answer? Is there a purpose and meaning in life? Is there something I have to live for than just what I'm living for today? And of course, Christ is the answer.
Did you see a real difference between the British college students and you find the American college students?
Yes, the British students are not nearly as acquainted with the Bible as the American students are. I just finished a series of meetings at Oxford and a series of 10 nights at Cambridge University. And I was at Great St. Mary's in Cambridge every night about a month ago. little more than a month ago now. And we had 3 other auditoriums by closed-circuit television, and they allowed only students to come. You had to have your ID. And we had 1 out of every 5 students at the university in the service every night. And then at the end of the 10 days, they estimated in the press that that 9 out of every 10 students at the university had attended the crusade at least once. And you could hear a pin drop. But I had to change all the messages I'd planned to give. I had to forget that they were university students.
Yes.
And I had to start back in the simple ABCs. As near as I could get to John 3:16, that's the type of message you had to give to those students, because they might be engineers, or they might be scientists, or they might be something else, but when it came to religious things, they were just, as a British clergyman told me, they're pagans.
Now,
Whereas in America, the average student in America has been exposed to television programs like this, which they don't have in Britain.
that's a sad thing
And
right
that's
there.
the sad thing. No
Yes.
television and radio.
A person has to almost hide himself not to be before some kind of Christian television in this country
That's
today.
right. And but they don't have that in Britain, you see, because the television and the radio is closed to the evangelical gospel by and large. Now, when I go over, they will cover me, for example, or they'll cover some outstanding or well-known person that comes. But the average British evangelical just doesn't get on television and radio, except in rare exceptions.
Now, Billy, you said you changed your sermons for those students. Did they change their mind after you got there? They didn't expect to come to that meeting before you arrived. Don't you think God
Many of
changed?
them did, because
Yeah.
the preparation was so tremendous. I went sponsored by what is called the KICU, and 1 out of every 10 students at Cambridge belongs to KICU. Now that's InterVarsity in this country. Over there, the InterVarsity is extremely conservative, very fundamental. And they had prepared for 2 years.
Oh, I
And
see.
they had already had little seminars on apologetics and and they had prepared the students so that when I gave the appeal, which was not the way I give it here, they didn't want me to give it for them to come forward, because they had a group opposing the crusade, we didn't call it crusade, called it mission, called SAMI, and they were against, they said, mass indoctrination. And they had raised quite a ruckus in the town, so the student leaders asked me if I would just tell the people that wanted to receive Christ to remain behind after the audience had left. And each night, a certain number, anywhere from maybe 50 to 200 on the last night, remained behind to receive Christ. But now the news comes that many people are being converted at both Cambridge and Oxford as a result, and they got a book out within 3 weeks on the 2 universities, written by the Secretary of the Labour Party in Oxford, who was opposed to my coming, but he had become a Christian 2 years earlier, had been saved, and he wrote this book and had changed his mind, and it's a fantastic book in which he got quotes from students, from faculty, and told the full story with a lot of pictures, and it's a very interesting book to read.
Isn't that great? Do you feel that England may have a great revival in the future?
Well,
has it gone too far?
I don't know. You know, the British scene at the moment is very mystifying to me. The evangelicals are quite divided. The Lord is using the charismatics in a very wonderful way in different areas of British life, in the Roman Catholic Church and in the Anglican Church. There is the Youth for Christ movement is becoming very strong. As a matter of fact, the Youth for Christ, which I helped found in Britain in 1946, Cliff Barrows and I really founded it together. They have 300 evangelists who are itinerant evangelists out preaching the gospel. And they have a magazine called Buzz, and it's one of the largest circulated religious magazines in Britain. And then there's the Evangelical Alliance, and these groups have joined together to invite us to come in 1982 or 1983 for a nationwide campaign of closed-circuit television, because they can't get on the BBC or the ITV, so they want 2,200 towns connected by closed-circuit television, which is possible to do. And that will be a very expensive thing, but they've got some men that say they'll pay for it.
Will it be in the air, or is it?
We don't know what we're going to do. They don't know whether it'll be in London, whether we'll be based in London, or whether we'll go to some cathedral. Or there have been 5 of the major cathedrals offered to us.
Will it be by cable or in the air?
No, it will be 1 day late. It will. In other words, you'll have it, and they put it on a cassette, and it goes to the city. There'll be 100 that will be live. 100 of the major cities will be live by cable. But then the other 2,000 that they hope to have will be one day late, in which they send a cassette and they'll have it the next day. Because, as you know, the train system in Britain gets everything there immediately.
Now, you're talking about years out in front. For how many years can a man do this?
Well, I've often thought about that because I'm almost 62. But I heard Sunday morning Dr. B.R. Lakin preach for Jerry Falwell, and he was 80, and boy, he was preaching like a house of fire. So maybe I can go on till I'm 80. And I don't know how old you are, but
I'm 2 or 3 years older than you are.
But I know you go full steam, and you go much stronger than I do.
No, I don't think so. Don't think so. How do you see our world today? You might say politically, like the great camps that we have with the common market in Europe and so forth. What movements prophetically do you see among the nations?
Well, I think that the big picture to me is the Middle East, because I think when you keep your eye on the Middle East, that's where it's happening prophetically, and that's where it's where the nations seem to be lining up. And for example, the scriptures indicated, you know, that Israel and Egypt would not be opposed to each other in the latter days. It seems to me in Ezekiel 38, they're not lined up. They're lined up together. And here they are. Who would have ever thought they would have this? You see.
Dreamed it.
And then Iran, and you have. All these tapes on Iran. I dare not mention Iran in your presence because I'm getting ready to listen to those tapes.
I want you to.
I'm going to listen to them, and because I want to learn all I can, because everywhere I go on these TV stations and interviews, I'm asked about Iran, and I'm asked about the Shiites, and I'm asked about the Sunnis, and I'm asked about the different sects of Islam, and my ignorance is pretty heavy.
Well,
I've preached in all these countries. I've been in Iran. I've been with the Nestorians in Iran and some of the Christian groups, very small groups in Iran. But to say that I was an expert on the Shiite element within Islam, I am not.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid that our total Protestant world, maybe Christian world, hasn't given the proper attention to the study, the whole Muslim situation.
No, I think that probably the crisis that we found ourselves in with the hostages could have been ended much quicker had we had an understanding of what the Shiites are. Now, that's a totally different Islamic world than, let's say, would be represented by Mr. Sadat and the Egyptian Islamic people, because there are many wonderful Islamic people in the world, and I have many friends among them. And I have on my team, for example, Dr. Agba Haq, whose father was a Muslim priest and who was converted to Christ in a very wonderful way. But Dr. Haq spends a great deal of his time in the Islamic world. He got his PhD in that subject, and then he was president of the Henry Martin School of Islamic Studies in New Delhi for 10 years. And he is an expert in this field. And then I have another friend at the Mayo Clinic who is a doctor, who is a professor at the American University in Beirut, and he comes from an Islamic background in Egypt, and he has talked to me over the phone a great deal about it. And I passed on to President Carter at least one or two of these conversations I had with these men, and I gave what they had to say to me. I was sort of the messenger boy to the president in giving him some of this information. But it might have come too late. I think that in the early stages, if we had known what we were dealing with, it might have been a little bit better.
I think our political men in our country were simply amazed when they found and discovered that this was actually a religious problem.
That's right. Well, some of them haven't discovered that yet.
But it's a religious problem.
It's a religious problem that they're dealing with, and many of them do not yet understand that. And I'm hoping that Mr. Muskie, who the new Secretary of State, will understand that in a way that perhaps has not been understood at the State Department.
The dividing up of the nations today is really a prophetic situation, isn't it?
In my judgment, it is. I'm not so sure that I can pinpoint it all because I have never been what I would call a great student of prophecy. I've stuck pretty much to the kerygma, the preaching of the gospel. I have studied, you know, the Scofield Bible from end to end ever since I was a child almost. And I have read a great deal on prophecy and preached prophetic messages, but I've never felt that I could pinpoint all the different things that I've read some men do. I never felt that was my gift. And because this might divert in my evangelistic ministry into these areas of prophecy, whereas I want to stick right to the gospel because I'm out preaching in these stadiums and auditoriums, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I feel that I could get diverted and become, because I was led to Christ by a man that spent a great deal of time, though, on prophecy, and I keep thinking about that. Mordecai Ham.
I know Dr. Ham.
You know Dr. Ham. You know, he was a great preacher of prophecy.
Yeah.
In fact, I was converted as a result, partially, of a sermon that he preached on hell. And, you know, you don't hear many sermons on hell these days.
Billy, the great continent of Africa, so long left out of our thinking, has come to the fore today. Do you feel something regarding, like in this 8th decade, of what Africa is going to be and do?
No, except that I was listening to Brother Andrew the other night, and he was talking about Africa and its... In fact, I was converted as a result, partially, of a sermon that he preached on hell. And, you know, you don't hear many sermons on hell these days.
Billy, the great continent of Africa, so long left out of our thinking, has come to the fore today. Do you feel something regarding, like in this 8th decade, of what Africa is going to be and do?
No, except that I was listening to Brother Andrew the other night, and he was talking about Africa and its strategic place in the world today. And of course, I feel the same thing. Africa, according to some statisticians, they say that below the Sahara, that 85% of black Africa will be Christian by the end of this century. And there are great religious revivals going on in spite of all the troubles that are taking place in Liberia and Uganda and all of these places. I think that it's causing many people down there to renew their efforts at evangelism. And I was in Nairobi last year, and I have many friends in some of the different countries of Africa because I've preached in many of the countries of Africa. And I have found a tremendous response every time I've preached the gospel in those countries.
Now, they seem to feel that there are two Africas. From the Sahara north, you've got the Arab Africa, and the south of that, you've got the
apartheid,
the real
South
black
Africa,
African. You've got the black African.
And south of that, you've got the white and black in South Africa. But in the middle, it's black.
There's possibly no evidence of great revival in that northern sector, in the northern part of the...
Well, there are many people that tell me that the Lord is moving among Christians in Egypt and in Morocco. Of course, there are Christians in all those countries, even in Syria, you know, as well as small groups of Jewish people and small groups of Christian people. And I'm told that there are elements of small revival here and there, especially in Jordan.
In Jordan?
And, you know, about 18% of the people of Jordan are Christians. I mean, professing Christians, let's say. And among the Arab people also in Israel, there are, you know, the many Christians, like in Nazareth. I've preached in Nazareth to the Arab Christians there. And as well as to Jewish people, I preached in Haifa, I preached in Jerusalem, I preached in many of the cities in Israel, and I preached on the subject, why I'm a Christian. I said, now, if a leader of Buddhism should come to your country, wouldn't you want to know why he's a Buddhist? I said, well, I just want to tell you why I'm a Christian. And they would listen very respectfully, and they filled all the auditoriums I went to, and of course, they weren't big ones. Most of them seated about 1,000 or 1,500 people. And the people came, and they listened very intently. And of course, God has given me, and always has, a great love for the Jewish people. And I find a great receptivity, because I think Jewish people, like all other peoples in the world, are searching. And many of them are waiting for Messiah. And of course, I talked to the chief rabbi in Jerusalem, and I said, do you believe Messiah is coming? And he said, yes. And I said, I believe he's coming too, but I believe it'll be Jesus Christ. And he smiled, and he said, of course, that's our difference. But I feel that God is moving in that part of the world in a very unusual way. The area that I don't see too much movement of the Spirit of God is in Europe itself.
Isn't that
especially in France and some of those countries. And I've held crusades in the past 2 years in Gothenburg, Sweden, one in Stockholm last year. And we saw large crowds, but we didn't see too many people coming to know the Lord. I preached to the stadium in Oslo, 22,000 people, and very few responded to the gospel. Maybe 200 or 300 out of the whole audience, whereas in America you might see 2,000 or 3,000 come.
Isn't that amazing?
Well, the Scandinavian people are, they don't move easily anyway, but they're encouraging signs even in Scandinavia. And I think they're encouraging signs in the Soviet Union. They're encouraging signs among Christians in Poland and Hungary and all those countries I've been to.
Do you think Russia's going to permit the church there to be freer to worship God? Or
well, I don't know that the Russians have too much to say about it. I think that the Polish people run their own country pretty well as far as religion is concerned, because, as you know, it's Roman Catholic. And so when I was invited by what is called the Ecumenical Council, which is a small group of Protestant churches, to Poland, the Roman Catholic Church decided, they had a meeting of what is called their episcopate, and they voted to support the invitation. They didn't vote to join the invitation, but to support it. So I preached in the big Roman Catholic churches throughout Poland, because they were the biggest auditoriums in the city. And what would happen was a Roman Catholic bishop or an archbishop or somebody would give a greeting, and then they had in front of the chancel, they had a platform, and then the Protestants took over in the church, the Baptists and so forth, and then I would preach and give an invitation just like I give here. And people responded. For example, in Krakow, where the present Pope comes from, and this was only 4 days before he was elected Pope on October the 12th, year before last, I preached, and they had 4,000 students in the service and thousands in the streets. And I preached how to be saved, how to be born again. And you'd be amazed at the response we had. I find a tremendous response in Eastern Europe to the gospel. Beautiful. And they taped my messages. You can buy them in cassette form in Hungary and in Poland. They took them all across Eastern Europe. They also printed my books. You can write them in. You can get them in bookstores in Hungary and in Poland. That is the sermons I preached while I was there. Yeah. And I preached nothing but gospel sermons. I didn't talk on world affairs or any of these things. I just preached the gospel primarily on how to be saved.
Well, that's a miracle, isn't it?
It's a miracle.
A few years ago they wouldn't have done that.
No. And I don't know whether we'll ever get to go back to any of those countries or not, but I would think that we will be going possibly to East Germany next in Eastern Europe, if things quiet down a little bit. And I think we're going to see another period of open doors in which God has allowed the gospel to be proclaimed before they're maybe shut forever.
Billy, do you have a feeling that America's a key nation, that if America were to fall, for example, much of the free world would fall with it, and if America stands stable, that it'll hold up most of the free world? Do you feel America's a key nation?
Well, America seems to be the last place that people are fleeing to, like the people coming from Cuba. And I think, people ask me, do you see America in prophecy? Well, there are passages that one could read into it, I would think, as referring to America. I'm not so sure, but where America stands in prophecy. But certainly, as one looks at things from our perspective in time, America is the key nation. In our part of the world, and the Soviet Union and China are the key nations in that part of the world, because there are 3 superpowers in the world. China's a superpower simply because they have 1 billion people. My wife is on her way today to China, and she's going back to her old birthplace. She was born and reared there, and they're letting her go to her old house. And she has never been back since she was 17 years of age.
Beautiful. Isn't that great? These are great days to be alive.
These are tremendous days, and I wouldn't want to live in any other period of history. It's a dangerous period to be alive.
Yes.
Because there are so many crackpots today and so many mentally disturbed people. And they get all stirred up, as you know, on religion and politics. And you never know, when somebody may try to do something.
Yeah.
And I never think about it. And
No.
people say, well, you ought to have bodyguards. I've never had a bodyguard in my life except the angel that the Lord assigns to me. And I'm sure that I have an angel that is assigned to me. I don't know his name, but I've seen some situations.
He's done a good job.
He's done a good job.
That is great. How can we reach America today?
Through television, doing what you're doing. I don't think there's any way to get into the tenement houses, into the areas where it's very difficult for a preacher to even go and call on people, where they don't even allow you into some of these apartment houses and big housing complexes, or into hotel rooms where millions of people stay. It's by television and by radio and by the printed page. I think all three of those mediums, and that's where we are concentrating, and that's where you're concentrating. I'm not on television but just a little bit of time compared to you, but the little bit of time that we're on, we get an avalanche of mail from people who say that they watch and that they accept Christ, or that they want more literature and that sort of thing.
Well, I think you're doing it right. I think if you were doing it every week, it would become common. But like you are doing it, they look forward to it, you see.
Well, this is what we thought in the beginning. I'm not so sure. We could go on an hour or two a day maybe, or something like that. But I have felt that the Lord wanted me to come on across the country a few times a year and just preach the gospel from the crusades, because the crusade gives it an aspect that is not being done by other people. And it also makes people feel that they're a participant in the crusade as they see the crowd and then hear me preach, and that it is a little different approach than maybe some others. Though I suppose I would like to just sit and talk into the camera and tell people about the Lord.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Is it as easy to get time on the stations as it used to be? Or?
It changes. It varies. For example, one station, let's say in a city like Oklahoma City, may say no for 2 or 3 years, and maybe they'll have a change of management, and then they'll say yes.
I see.
So it changes like that. We're on about the same number of stations as we've ever been on.
It
runs about 250 to 300 each time.
You don't go through a network then? You buy up?
No, it's a syndicated thing, that we try to come on during the same week so that the publicity across the country is synchronized. And usually the same nights across the country. And we try to get the same time if we can. We're not always able to do that. And we're not always able to get the same night. But usually we call prime time anywhere from 7 to 10 o'clock. And then in some cities, let's say like New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, we'll run it 2 and 3 times each night at different times on different stations, feeling that it reaches a different audience.
Yes, it does. That's right. How about the owned and operated stations by Christians? There's a few of them in the country today that are actually owned and operated by Christian groups.
Yes, well, I think we are on some of those. I don't know how many, because I don't handle that and don't always know which are the Christian stations, which are the non-Christian, but I'm sure that we're on them. We're on a lot of this cable thing, and I would have to ask some of my associates.
No, that wasn't my question. Do you think it's a good thing?
Oh, yes, of course I do. I would like to have seen Christians years ago bought up some of these stations across the country. And in the early days, I tried to get a Christian man who's a very wealthy man. When I knew that a certain network in 1950 was for sale, could have been bought for $5 million, I tried to get him to buy it, and he looked into it, and he said he didn't think there was very much future for television.
That's great, isn't it? Oh, my Lord.
But you couldn't buy that network today for $5 billion, much less.
No.
Bunker Hunt wouldn't have enough money for that.
We feel that, that with a Christian-operated station that you can give the children what they should have, and that if you go to the networks, they're going to show children things that they shouldn't be seeing.
Well, I think that from what I have been told, that television is going to change very drastically in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. They have new sets now, as you well know, that by the end of the year will be on the market. And instead of reaching up and changing the dial or having a little button to push, you'll just speak and say, I want channel 4, and it'll be voice activated.
Is that amazing?
Oh, yes, that'll be on sale by the end of the year. And then there are all kinds of changes so that we may be, I'm told by some of the officials in one of the networks that I'm sort of identified with, that there may be as much as 100 channels in the next 5 years, and that networks as we know them today, the major networks, may be sort of passé, may be out of, and it'll be open, and there are going to be new openings for Christians, I think, to get on some of these channels, because some channels may be assigned by the FCC to R-rated films, some may be assigned to religion, some may be assigned to plays, some may be assigned to motion pictures, and so forth and so on. I don't know what's coming, but there are many speculations that I've been told. Now, you'd be an expert in that, but I do think that we're in for some big technological changes that could either hurt or could help the cause of evangelism and the proclamation of the gospel.
The satellites are going to make all the difference until you can almost have your own in your home.
That's right.
And bring in all the different...
in fact, I remember Pat Robertson told me, I think, that he could put a satellite, one of these receivers on top of my house for $10,000, and I could bring in things from all over the world on that satellite. And I told them I'd wait till it got a little cheaper.
Well, that's what they say is going to happen.
That's what they say is going to happen.
It's going to get a little cheaper.
That's right.
That's right. It sure is nice to talk with you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Brother Lester. It's wonderful to see you.
And we are sure for what you're doing.
Well, thank you, and God bless you in your ministry.